And I want you to know something, that if you're going to hear the voice of God, you got to get to a place where you got enough noise canceling in your life that you can hear the whisper of God. Who are you listening to? And better yet, maybe like, are you even hearing a voice at all? Now, some of you are like, I hear voices all the time. No, I'm not talking about that kind of voice, all right? All right, I get that, all right? But I'm talking about the voice of God. And so many times when preachers say that, like the voice of God, a lot of times it goes over people's heads because they're just thinking, what do you mean the voice of God? Like, you for real, Jason, just hear something where it's like, hey, Jason, preach this right now. No, that doesn't happen. In fact, I want to say right up front, I've never ever heard the audible voice of God. Never have. I'm not saying that you can't, okay? Maybe you have, and I've heard people say they have, and I'm not going to be like, oh, no, you didn't. Maybe you did, and we'll talk about whether it was true or not later, but but I think he speaks in other ways, and what we have inside of us is a internal desire that's put there by God that is for eternity. And it's a desire to know something beyond ourselves. There's inescapable questions, you might call them, that you can't escape in life, that you're born with, that God has given to you. Questions like, who am I? It's a question of identity. So many people are struggling with identity right now. And they say, I'm this, I'm that, and they're trying to find identity. God put that question in you. I want you to know that. Who am I? And then another one might be like, where do I belong? It's a question of belonging, a community. I need to find a group of people that I commune with and be with. That's one reason why people come to church, is because they want to be in a like-minded group of individuals that they can commune with. It's why people get into small groups and even like clubs and different things that you may be a part of outside of church, is because of the community. How do I belong? Identity, community. And then there's the question of, what am I supposed to do with my life? And that's a question of purpose, right? Like, what was I created for? And all of us have these inescapable questions in life, and they start at a young age, and all of your life you're trying to answer these questions, and God put them there. And as God puts them there, what it does is this: it causes us to get to the end of ourself, and we can't find the answers, and we get to a point where we say, hey, I've got only one way to look, and that's up. And then we realize that there's this God of the universe who cares about me and loves me and wants to know more about me, or knows everything about me, wants me to know more about him. And if I put my trust in his son, Jesus, then I can answer the question of identity. I was made in the image of Jesus Christ. I was made in God's image. I can answer the question of belonging, because I can be part of a church community and belong to somebody and belong to other people. I can answer the question, what am I supposed to do with my life? Because I realize that I was put on this earth to glorify God. And as we have these questions, the problem is there's so much noise around us. Sometimes we can't hear the answers to these questions. And what I think we need to do is we need to get us a good set of noise canceling headphones. Anybody know what I'm talking about? These were invented in my lifetime. How many of you remember a Walkman? Anybody remember having a Walkman? Yeah, all right, yeah. The thing was like this big, and they played these things called cassettes. Anybody know what a cassette is? Yeah? Okay, a couple of you. All right, good. Some of the young people know what a cassette is. Good. They're like, oh yeah, that's cool, that's vintage. You're vintage, Pastor Jason. Anyway, so I would have a Walkman on mowing my yard. We had a riding lawnmower. There was stuff, okay, I forgot, you're from Yuma. There's this stuff that grows from the ground when the rain falls. It's called grass. And in Kentucky, where I'm from, you had to mow it like every week, okay? And you would spend hours on a riding lawnmower. And so I would listen to music. I would listen to preaching. We didn't have podcasts back then. So that was about it. I would listen to music, and sometimes I would even listen to sermons and stuff. And so I would put these Walkman headset on, but they weren't noise canceling, because you still heard the of the lawnmower, and you had to jack the volume so high that now I can't hear anything. It ruined my hearing. But then somebody created these noise canceling headphones. You put these things on, and you turn on the button. It's complete silence from you people. Did you guys say something? It's amazing. And it blocks out everything so that you can hear clearly the music, the voice, the podcast, the whatever that is coming to you through the speakers. In real life, here's the deal. We need supernatural noise-canceling headphones because we've got so much noise coming to us. We got so many voices trying to speak to us. We got voices from our past, voices in our present, voices about the future. We've got social media that speaks to us even if we don't have the volume on, even if we got our phone silenced and we're just scrolling. It's still going through our eye gate into our mind and causing all kinds of noise in our brain. And it's causing us sometimes to not hear what needs to be said to us. And so many times in our life, what we do is we just go through life and go through the motions like, God speak to me, God speak to me, God speak to me. But we never make time for that. And we want to hear from God. And we think maybe God's going to somehow knock us over. Maybe God's going to send some kind of big giant sign in the sky and tell us what to do with our life and who we should belong to and who I was created to be. And maybe that's how he speaks to us. But if we read the Word of God, the Bible, we will know that God speaks to us in a lot of different ways. But one of the ways he speaks to us is simply in a whisper. There's a guy in the Old Testament, his name's Elijah. Everybody say Elijah. Elijah was a guy, he was a prophet of God. He was so powerful, supernaturally powerful. And he had so much power, but yet he was driven a lot by fear. And the truth is, we don't do what God is speaking to us a lot of times, not because we don't hear him, but because we hear him and we're afraid to do and say yes to whatever he's asking us to do. We're either afraid of the failure that we may not make it, or we're afraid, oh, is that really God's voice, or was it some burrito I ate last night? You know. We're afraid that maybe I'll miss God's will for my life. I'll miss God's voice for my life. And so we block all that stuff out because of fear. Elijah was the same way. There was this lady named Jezebel, and she had a husband named Ahab. And Ahab and Jezebel were ruling the country, but Jezebel, she was really the ruler. You know what I mean? All right, guys? You know, like she was really ruling. But Ahab, he let her rule in such a way that Jezebel was mean. She was bad. She was evil. She had all these prophets of this false god, this demon god named Baal. And she had all these prophets, and they were speaking in an evil way, in a demonic way to the people. And then there was Elijah. And Elijah one day was like, you get all your prophets together and I'll come down. We'll go to this mountain and we're going to set up these altars. And I'm summarizing the story here, okay? And we'll see which God brings fire down from heaven to burn up the sacrifice on the altars. And so the prophets of Baal, they go up there and they build an altar, and he warns them. He says, no, don't cheat, because sometimes in those days they already had the altar built, and they would dig a tunnel and they would go up from the bottom and they would light it so everybody would be like, ooh. But in reality, it was fake. And so the prophets of Baal, they begin jumping around and they begin calling on their demon gods like, send down fire, send down fire, send down fire, send down fire. Nothing happened. Elijah's over in the corner. He's making fun of him. He's like, maybe your God's on vacation. Maybe he's taking a nap. Like all kinds of stuff. And then finally Elijah's like, okay, you've had enough. It's my turn. So he says, go and get a bunch of water, and I want you to just drench the bull that's on there. So they drench the sacrifice, and then I want you to drench it again. And they drenched it so much until the sacrifice was wet, soaking wet. The wood was soaking wet. The stones were soaking wet. The ground was soaking wet. They done a trench around it, and it filled up so much water that it filled the trench around the altar. And then he just prayed, and all of a sudden, whoosh, the fire came down, burned up the sacrifice, burned up the wood, burned up the stone, burned up the grass around it, and also burned up all the water that was in the trench. And then he went out and he killed all the prophets of Baal. Woo! That was amazing. Yeah, I love it. And he does all of that. And then do you know what he does? He goes and he runs away in fear. He hides. We do the same thing. We get on fire for God. We're excited about what he's going to do in our life. And we're like, oh man, I can really feel God's voice. I can feel his presence in my life. And I know he wants me to do this, or I know he wants me to do that. And but I can't do that. I'm not this person. I'm not Elijah. I'm not that person. I'm not that person. I'm not spiritual enough. I've got this past. I've got this anxiety. I've got this depression. I've got this fear of my family of origin and where I came from. And I'm not born like those people. And I don't have any money. And I can't blah, 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 blah. Excuse. And then we run and we hide. And Elijah goes and he runs and he hides in a cave. And we pick up the story right there because the Lord was about to pass by. And the Lord tells him to get out of the cave because I'm about to speak to you. And look what the Bible says. It says this. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. Whoosh, big wind comes through, shatters the rocks. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. You like my sound effects? But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. Then after the fire came a gentle whisper. Everybody say, whisper. That was cool. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and he went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. He was hiding. He was hiding, and he had done this great spiritual thing, this great thing. He had killed all the prophets of Baal. He had called down fire from heaven through his prayer. God had heard him, but yet he was hiding. He was depressed. He'd been running. He was worn out, and he says, I don't even know if God's speaking anymore. God, maybe you're going to pass by. Is it the earthquake? Is it the fire? Is it the wind? And God's like, no, it's the whisper. And I want you to know something, that if you're going to hear the voice of God, you got to get to a place where you got enough noise canceling in your life that you can hear the whisper of God. If you don't, you're not going to hear God. Can God speak through a big noise breaking thing? Absolutely. But he's probably more than likely 9 times out of 10 going to speak to you through a gentle, small voice that is a whisper.